Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I am your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin, joined by a terrific guest today. He is Thor Nystrom at Thor KU on the Twitters. He is the NFL Draft and college football analyst for FantasyPros and Betting Pros, and also covering the Vikings at Score North, and a good friend of mine. Thor, how are we doing today?
I'm doing great, Kevin. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. I love the helmets. Have you added any new ones since the last time we talked?
You know I have, Kevin. Yeah,
I know. It looks like more.
Collection.
Yeah.
And now we have a couple new FBS teams coming this coming season, so I'll have a couple more to add to the collection. But yeah, we're more than halfway there to having the full FBS, but I won't rest until I have all 133 or 34 or whatever the exact number is going to be this year.
Excellent. Did you feature the Cuse, the Syracuse, prominently just for me because I live in Cuse? Or
I did. We had to get the shout out for the orange for you, Kevin.
The Orangeman. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Thor is here to help us talk some Falcons draft targets. Thor does a ton of work every single year breaking down all kinds of draft prospects, looking at team fits and needs. Obviously, a lot of fantasy angles to that as well. But yeah, today let's kick things off with, I put out a mock draft today. You put out a mock draft today. Let's start with yours. In the first round, the Falcons getting Tyree Wilson, which I think probably most fans would be ecstatic to see happen. Doesn't always fall to the Falcons at 8. So what do you think about the chances of that pick happening, and what do you think about that fit for Tyree Wilson in Atlanta?
Yeah, I mean, there's no guarantee that Tyree Wilson's going to be there, but I think if he is, that it just seems like a really, really good fit. You know, I mean, like he could start going, anywhere. I mean, 5 that, to Seattle, that's been something that's bandied about. You've seen him mocked also to Detroit at 6. But yeah, if he somehow makes it through that little gauntlet there, and the Falcons, you would imagine they have to be hoping that the 4 quarterbacks are going to go above them. Seems like they're hitching their wagons to Ritter here in the short term. See how that pans out. But if that happens, that's the scenario where a guy like Tyree Wilson falls down. And if he's not there, I think Lucas Van Ness, if you're looking at the edge, would be in play too. And Nolan Smith is not too far off too, depending on how they view him. Obviously, Nolan Smith's coming off an injury, and he's undersized as well. But he's so crafty and proved at the NFL Combine that he's way more than crafty. The athleticism is absolutely stupid.
Yeah, and with the Falcons signing Calais Campbell, the Tyree Wilson makes a lot of sense as like their successor to Calais Campbell. Similar body type, obviously, with just being gigantic humans, and a lot of strength in their profiles and things like that. So I would think that would make a ton of sense because Campbell's only in Atlanta on the 1-year deal. So getting someone that, I mean, I couldn't think of a better mentor for Tyree Wilson than Calais Campbell, who would be basically what Wilson would probably be hoping to get to in terms of his ceiling in the NFL. So that one makes a ton of sense. Yeah, talk to me about Van Ness, because he's a guy I'm a little bit skeptical of as a top 10 pick. I think he's going to be obviously a first rounder. There's always people saying, oh, he wasn't even a starter. I know that has a lot to do with Iowa and how they play guys. And there's a lot of that. So, yeah, talk to me about Van Ness, because he is someone that has had some buzz to the Falcons. Do you think he is legitimately a top 10 prospect?
I do. Yeah. The 0 start thing is totally an Iowa thing. That's totally a Kirk Ferentz thing. We've seen that with guys in the past, I mean, just at the same position. AJ Epinesa, he didn't get to start until his last year there, and that was just because the veterans that were above him that they had graduated on. It's just the way that they do it. But Van Ness led the team in snaps for edge rushers. So I mean, sort of technically he was the starter in terms of playing the most snaps, but like that's just the way it is at Iowa. They have this weird hierarchy with their roster where you have to like earn it, you have to move up, whatever but it's not the same thing with their coaching staff, because Mr. Brian Ferentz is still the offensive coordinator, even though the team can't score any points. So, but yeah, as far as Van Ness's profile, he's a speed to power freight train, and that the speed to power thing is like his 100-mile-per-hour fastball. And so offensive tackle, certainly in the Big Ten and also at the NFL level, you got to sit back on your heels for that heat, because if you're not, he's going to blow right past you, and he jars you right off the line, whatever, just explodes off the snap, descends on you really quick. And then once you do that, that opens up the possibility for the counter moves. What I want to see of him, going for the next step of his development is developing more of those counter moves and stuff like that, because you're going to get all those opportunities just because the way offensive linemen have to play you to protect against that 100-mile-per-hour fastball. It's sort of like the hitters in the back of the batter's box choked, up on the bat, because he knows that heater's coming. And then if you can develop a Bugs Bunny changeup or, some sort of breaking pitch, whatever, it's much easier to get that pitch across from a guy that's sitting back dead right on that fastball. So that's how I think of Lucas Van Ness. He's sort of he's an exciting guy because he's at the start of his curve, but you saw over his 3 years on campus, he got better. And I think he's one of those prospects who's just ascending.
Yeah. And it definitely seems like a lot of, the analysts that are pretty universally respected, and Daniel Jeremiah and guys like that have had him consistently high in the first round. So it definitely seems like that is one to keep an eye on. And Nolan Smith, another name you mentioned, he is a guy that apparently does have connection to the Falcons, that there is buzz that they are strongly considering him at 8. And I've heard that from multiple people now. So that's another one that's really interesting. Kind of like the polar opposite in terms of like body type to Tyree Wilson. But a guy that may offer some additional flexibility as potentially playing some off ball. Some people have said, he may be able to have, not necessarily that he's Micah Parsons, obviously, but that he could play a similar role as an edge rusher and an off ball linebacker. What do you think about Nolan Smith? Are you one of the folks that is, high on him being an early first rounder potentially?
Yeah, I think he's going to go in the top half of the first round for sure. Yeah, and the Nolan Smith watch, it starts right after, I guess the top 5. Because I mean, if he went to Detroit at 6, I wouldn't be stunned. Like, they're certainly considering edge rusher, and he's in that small group where you're gonna consider whatever. But yeah, the versatility in Nolan Smith, I agree that's something he could do. He could play some off ball, and then you can get him screaming off the edge in the pure passing situations, whatever. And I mean, when it goes to the combine, I shouldn't have been surprised by how well he tested, but I still was, just because it was so stupid with the 4.39 40-yard dash. And it wasn't just that, his 20-yard split and his 10-yard split, 99.99th percentile in the 20-yard split, and then he had the best 10-yard split ever for an edge guy. And then both of his jumps were elites, 98%. Well, actually, both of them were 98 percentile. So yeah, just a freak athlete, and you can do a lot of different stuff with him. But like you mentioned, it's a totally different type of player and body style than Tyree Wilson. Tyree Wilson is built sort of like Hercules, and he has those super duper long levers on him. That's not Nolan Smith, but Nolan Smith, he brings you that craftiness on the field in conjunction with the athleticism. And I think you're going to be able to do different stuff with him at the next level for sure.
Yeah. I know everyone raves about Nolan Smith's football character and his competitive toughness too, as a guy that you wouldn't know he was that size when he plays the run. I mean, I've never seen someone sub like 240 play the run as well as Nolan Smith. So I think a lot of the concerns at his size are probably mitigated because you just like it. He just is so nasty that it just doesn't matter. Like he's so physical with how he plays it, just and like crafty, like you said. He finds ways to get around it, uses his leverage really well. Just knows how to attack the outside shoulder guys and he just knows how to do it. He's got the technique down, and I'm not as concerned, I think, as some people are about the size limitations. And maybe he can put on a few pounds, but I do like that pick. That's definitely one of the sleeper picks.
Yeah, and Kevin, just to your point, like sometimes, when we're talking about like the smaller guys in the box there, one of your concerns is with, both the length and then your reliability with tackling. There was a linebacker that the Vikings took a couple years ago in the 3rd round who he had some impressive things about his college profile. But one of the things that concerned you was he had super duper short arms, and there was an elevated missed tackle rate that he had. And that absolutely projected to the next level because he hasn't been able to do that there. And I'm talking about Chaz Surratt, who turned out to be a big bust for the Vikings. Nolan Smith had one of the best missed tackle rates in terms of being the lowest in this entire edge class, only 9.1% missed tackle rate. And he only missed 2 last year. So to your point, I mean, he's one of those guys that gets on the doorstep really quick, provides that heat. But then when he's there, he brings the technique. It's not just like total hair on fire or whatever. And that's, that what we talk about, that special sauce with the dichotomy between the athleticism and his craftiness or his adherence to technique on the field. And that's where you see some of that stuff mitigate, or, where you see that manifest. And that's why, to me, that some of that size stuff, it's mitigated because of those things. We've already seen the proof of concept with Nolan Smith at the very highest levels of college football, because obviously Georgia made their couple of runs to the title, and Nolan Smith missed the end of last year, but his entire career up till then, he has been a very reliable tackler.
Yeah. And do you have, faith that he's going to put it together as a pass rusher? I mean, I kind of do, because when you have someone that's passionate about the game, if he doesn't hit the ceiling, it's not going to be because he didn't work his ass off. So
1,000%. Yeah. He's just so difficult to deal with off the edge, because you just don't get guys screaming down that have that athletic profile. And then again, it's not just that, it's like a receiver that's super athletic that can also run the routes. That's what you think about with Nolan Smith. It's not just like a one note kind of a thing. He can throw, if I'm going back to the baseball metaphors, he can throw so many different pitches at the offensive tackles. So you can't just sit dead red on the explosion, the speed, etc. If you do that, he can just pirouette inside, and now he has a more direct path to the quarterback. So yeah, the pass rushing with him is going to translate.
Yeah, definitely. I'm interested in that as sort of like a dark horse pick for the Falcons today. You don't see it a lot in mocks, but I have a feeling we might see it more often as the buzz sort of starts to grow there. But we talked a lot about edge rushers. They've also been connected to guys like Christian Gonzalez. I finally broke down and sent Bijan Robinson to him today in my mock draft, just because, everyone was like, oh, do one with Bijan. So we did one with Bijan. But we also know that Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot, they do not care what you think or I think about positional value. They took a tight end at 4. So I think when I tell people about that, it's like, yeah, they could take Bijan at 8. Absolutely. They could view him as the best player available. And he, in terms of pure talent, he could easily be the best player available at that spot. But what are some other spots, some other prospects at 8 that you think the Falcons could consider depending on how the board falls?
Yeah, and the Bijan one is super interesting, because I agree that he would be an absolutely great fit there. And when you're thinking about, looking at next year, let's just assume that they're not going to take the quarterback, and it's, that's just the assumption, especially with where they're picking. They're going to roll it forward with Ritter. Well, then what next year becomes, it's the referendum year on Ritter. Is he the long-term answer, or the next year in the draft, are we going to have to take one? And the good news is, either way that it goes, it ends up well for the Falcons. Let's say that Ritter falls on his face, even though you put all the skill talent around him that you would want. Well, then the Falcons are going to be picking near the top of the next class when Caleb Williams is coming out, when Drake May is coming out. Then you can just move beyond Ritter. But in a scenario like this where, and they might even be able to trade down a little bit and get Bijan, right? Mm-hmm. Again, I think that's a great fit, but they could potentially even get down into the teens somewhere and potentially still get him, add some picks. And again, if you do that, if you're Desmond Ritter, what more could you ask for? Right. In terms of your skill talent? You get to work next to Bijan Robinson, who in very short order is going to be one of the best running backs in the entire NFL. And then you have those enormous Sequoia receiving targets downfield, and Drake London and Kyle Pitts and the whole gang. So I think that'd be cool either way it goes, because obviously if Ritter succeeded with those guys around him, then you can roll it forward with him. If not, then you're going to be picking higher in the draft next year anyway, when 2 more of these stud quarterbacks are coming right off the assembly line.
Yeah, and you mentioned the quarterback decision. That's been a very hot topic with the national media in particular. It seems like the Falcons were expected to be the team to go get Lamar, and they did not. And everyone seems to be pretty upset that they did not get Lamar. But they've tried to make it clear that they're not going to get Lamar. Obviously, they could be lying, because teams do that a lot. But yeah, what do you think about that decision with Ritter to sort of? You mentioned the idea of, they're not really risking a lot by letting him have the keys this year. They only invested a 3rd round pick. They can see what they've got, and then if it doesn't work, they have a good shot at a quarterback next year, and they've got the rest of the team built. So instead of, back in 2021, the hot topic, of course, was should the Falcons take Justin Fields or Kyle Pitts, and they went with Kyle Pitts. They would have been dropping Justin Fields, obviously, into what was more or less a disaster roster at the time. Now they could be going into next season with, the same choice, but now it could be we're dropping the quarterback into a roster that's ready instead of asking this quarterback to be our savior. And I wonder if that's a better strategy, but I'm curious what you think about how they're sort of going about the quarterback position this offseason.
Yeah, I like that. The way they're building, it's more methodical. It reminds you sort of how the Lions have built their roster, right? Where it's like sort of those positions around the quarterback. Obviously, the Lions, they were sort of tied to Goff or whatever, but they did a really good job of sort of building around him. And the Falcons, just a younger version of that same build type. And you put everything around Ritter, and then this year you can just see, and then either way, either way that scenario shakes out, I think it's good news for the Falcons. Falcons might be a little bit higher on Ritter than me, but I'm more apt than I think, like, I don't know, just regular folks, certainly people that are employed there, that in terms of like, well, if next year goes wayward, then that opens up even more possibility. So I'm not afraid to build that way, build it slow, and then, fail. If that's what's going to happen here, we give Ritter that referendum season. Or maybe, it's the sink or swim thing. Maybe he does swim, but I like the strategy.
Yeah, and because if it hits, then you look like a genius. So, and
Exactly.
you got a quarterback.
And you found something for free, basically.
Yeah, you look like a genius, and you have a quarterback under contract for another 2 seasons at $1.7 million. So, so I mean, there is an upside there. Everyone always talks about, oh, you want to build, a team with a quarterback on a rookie contract, but now that they have a chance to do it, people are like, no, not that one. You need a different one. Go get a different rookie. So we'll see. It could not work, and I think fans need to recognize that too. Like, it may not work, but it could also work. So hey, there's some upside either way. But looking at the first round or other rounds, other needs that the Falcons have, we talked a lot about edge. We mentioned Bijan. I think you and I are both sort of on the idea that they're probably not taking a quarterback. Like, if they're smoke screening, this is the most, determined smoke screen I've ever seen, where they've got the owner out, talking up to quarterback now. So, quarterback probably off the board, but other positions like cornerback is one. Casey Hayward is one of the starters, and he ended up missing most of last season with an injury. And they can save $5 million from moving on from him. They don't necessarily need the money, obviously, but cornerback could be a spot. We've talked, wide receiver. They still have needs there. What are some other spots that you think that Falcons should be sort of focusing in on in maybe the day 2 range of the draft?
Yeah, day 2, I think, is where they go and get a receiver. And I think that's the spot in this draft to start shopping for receivers. Especially where the Falcons are picking. I wouldn't want to lead that dance. There's not going to be a receiver taken before you. I wouldn't pop the receiver at 8 or whatever. But because this class, in contrast to the past couple of receiver classes where you had all the mega stud surefire receivers coming out, just a whole group of them, this class, we don't really have that. But like, if you just lop off the tier 1 and then you go down, then it starts to look like the other receiver classes. So as long as you're not using a pick on a receiver where it's sort of like a tier 1 type draft import with the equity that you're given for him, I think that's where I'd invest. The depth of it, you can find the receivers day 2, early day 3, mixing and matching to what you need, depending on the team in question. And with the Falcons, like we said, you already have those big sequoias that can go down the field and go up and get it. What those 2 guys bring you, going forward, the manifestation of it is you have all this extra space in the intermediate area because the defense just is not able to crowd up because of that ability. And as we know with Desmond Ridder, he's a quarterback that can let it fly and like to at Cincinnati. So, with that sort of propensity there, you're going to have all this intermediate space. You can find yourself a receiver on day 2, and you should be able to, that's going to be able to take advantage of the single coverage and then eat up in the intermediate area. That would be absolutely one that I'd be looking at. You mentioned the interior defensive line. That's certainly another need for the Falcons as well. As far as the first round, unless Jalen Carter falls to 8, and I don't think he's going to, but if he did, that could be one where it would be an easy fill of that position, whatever. But then after that, then you're probably looking at the day 2 guys. Is Maisie Smith going to fall down there? But then if not, you can start to look at some of the other guys. But this is not the best interior defensive line class after the top guy. It drops off a bit, in terms of the tier, and then you have the next couple guys. Brisset is going to be long gone by the time the Falcons come up in round 2. Kalijah Cansey probably will too. So then you're dropping down to that next tier. So I think interior defensive line, barring the scenario of Jalen Carter falling to 8, I think that's one you put on the back burner to day 2 or even into day 3. And there are some sleeper defensive tackles that I like that potentially the Falcons could look at. Jarrett Clark, a kid from Coastal Carolina. I don't think he gets enough buzz, for just that sort of enormous planet-sized defensive tackle. His 3-cone and his agility drills were really, really good. They don't look at when you just compare him to when you're comparing it to Kalijah Cansey, maybe not. But when you understand you have the 60-pound weight discrepancy, and then you start comparing it to these other enormous nose tackles that have come into the league, he's impressive. And there's some other defensive tackles down in that area. You're talking 4th, 5th round that you could go out and target. You had brought up the cornerback one. That's certainly going to be in play in the first round too. And then the running back would be the other need. I think that's 5 of them. I think that would be the top 5 needs for the Falcons.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think, the same thing like edge and corner are the 2 that I think most people pencil in as like first, second round picks, because both of those classes have guys at the top that the Falcons could be choosing between. Christian Gonzalez, Devon Witherspoon, Maybe Joey Porter Jr. sneaks into that conversation as well. And then at edge, we talked about, Tyree Wilson, Nolan Smith, Lucas Van Ness. And then you go to the second round and it's the same story. You got a bunch of guys at cornerback, at edge that the team could be considering. I am curious your thoughts on like the Christian Gonzalez versus Devon Witherspoon versus other conversation at the top. Are you Gonzalez number 1, or are you more of a Witherspoon guy?
So I slightly prefer Witherspoon, just, adherence to tape, I guess. Witherspoon, he has the most impressive tape in the cornerback class. I don't think that there's any question about that. Obviously, Gonzalez has him on the measurables, but in terms of like the on-field stuff and recognizing the route and running the route for you and the different instinctual stuff, and then the feistiness and the tenacity, whatever, those are all the areas where you're putting Witherspoon above him. In truth, it would be, if I was on the clock, it would depend on the team I had and the defensive coordinator I had and the scheme that I had, because, it's sort of like Dalton Kincaid against Michael Mayer. They're 2 different kinds of tight ends. They're ranked pretty close if you're just ranking the players in a vacuum. But your decision on the 2 of them, if you were on the clock, it would depend on the team you had. If you needed the inline guy that was going to block more, you would take Mayer. And if you wanted more of the singular receiving talent that's really just difficult to deal with, then you would take Kincaid. And it's sort of the same thing, I think, with the Gonzalez against Witherspoon thing. But I don't have the scheme or a defensive coordinator or whatever. And so just in the sort of vacuum of all that context, I would have Witherspoon just slightly ahead of him. But those guys are pretty close.
Yeah. I also wonder, like, if because the Falcons do have AJ Terrell already, they sort of have that prototypical outside number 1 guy. So I wonder if they would lean more towards Witherspoon as like a shutdown number 2, not necessarily needing him to have the elite measurables to match up with the big guys because they've got Terrell already, or if they would want 2 of those guys with Gonzalez. That's sort of the debate that I have. But I agree on the tape. But I mean, would you have Witherspoon as like an option for the Falcons at 8? Like he would be worth that 8th overall pick in your mind?
For me, yeah. I'm going to have them ranked somewhere around there, maybe 10 or 11, but somewhere maybe 9, somewhere in there when I end up stacking the board. So yeah, in terms of positional value, and positional need, absolutely. And I loved your point about across from Terrell, because I feel like Witherspoon would be a really good complement for that. For playing across from AJ Terrell, so would be a good fit. But certainly, you would not argue against Christian Gonzalez. That kid's just a freak of an athlete when you're that big and you've been a track star for however long and everything like that. And he obviously went out and proved the concept of that stuff. But just if we're splitting hairs and parsing and stuff like that, just those ancillary things of Witherspoon's game, it's just hard for me to turn away from that. But in terms of you mentioned I put out the 2-round mock today. We had mentioned that Tyree Wilson in the first round. I ended up giving the Falcons Clark Phillips from Utah in the second round. Clark Phillips, a guy probably headed towards the slot, but he's going to be a very, very good one. His measurables were not as good, but if we're just talking again, just about the tape of the player, he might be top 3 of this cornerback class just in terms of pure tape. Go back and watch Utah's games against USC, particularly the last one. He had Jordan Addison in witness protection for that entire game. Like Jordan Addison couldn't get rid of him. He's going into the tunnel at halftime. Clark Phillips is still there. After the game, he's trying to get on the bus. Clark Phillips is still in his pocket. He could not get rid of Clark Phillips no matter what. There are certain guys in the NFL that Clark Phillips just won't be able to cover just because of their physical stature and the athleticism. But in the slot, he's just going to be fine. You're just going to stick him on a guy, lock him on the slot receiver for the NFL out of the nickel, and super duper feisty kid. And again, just so difficult to shake. Not all of this came out in the athletic profile, but on the field, his shiftiness and just sticking with the receivers in and out of those route breaks, the lack of separation that he gives is just high end. For me, Clark Phillips would be a borderline first round prospect just because of that tape, like I mentioned, but because of the lack of measurables coming in at 5'9", 184, he had the 54th percentile RAS score. Because of that, it's looking like Clark Phillips going to filter into the second round. But, when you're doing the draft and, let's say you're in the Falcons front office, you can't just think about it of like the first round pick and you almost have to do the 3-dimensional chess thing of, here are our needs, and stuff like that. And if we go with this position in the first round, what would be available to us at the other positions, with our next couple of premium picks, if we're looking to bring guys in that are going to be immediate contributors. And you mentioned it with like the Falcons are lucky in this regard. Both the edge class and the cornerback class in this specific draft class are very, very good. Some of the positional groups not as good. I mentioned receiver not as good as we've seen the past couple of years. That you want to wait on a little bit, but in terms of the edge and in terms of the cornerback, I agree with you. Those are ones that I would prioritize early on because the top of those classes are just so good in this year's draft class.
Yeah, and I think you're going to be happy with whoever's falling to you at 44 if you're going one of those spots. Like whether, at edge, it could be like Tuli Tuipulotu if they're looking for someone that's more of that inside-outside guy. Isaiah Foskey has sort of tumbled down, but at 40, he was once a first-round guy. I'd be happy to get him at 44 for sure. There's going to be guys there. You mentioned Clark Phillips. DJ Turner from Michigan also seems to be sort of tumbling a little bit, which shocked me considering he ran a 4.26, but, whatever. And then they've got sort of the up-and-comers like Julius Brents. He tested out crazy with his size too. So whatever flavor of corner you want, you could get that more nickel guy, you could get that speed guy, you could get that size guy. At 44, you'll have your choice of the options. So those are definitely some good ones. Yeah.
And Kevin, we talk about the 3-dimensional chess thing. Let's say, in my mock draft, like I said, give Tyree Wilson at number 8, but let's say instead that they did Witherspoon there or that Gonzalez fell down there. And now you defer it to the edge thing. In mine, right after Clark Phillips, my next two ones were Keon White and Will McDonald. A couple guys that in some mocks have gotten into the back end of the first round, but there's so many edge, like I said, there's so many edge defenders in this class. Some of those guys are going to filter down, and some of these cornerbacks that didn't test as well, they're going to filter down too to where the Falcons are going to be picking there. So then, in this mock exercise, it becomes: would you prefer Witherspoon and your choice of Keon White or Will McDonald, or would you prefer it the way that I had it, where it's Tyree Wilson or Clark Phillips? But again, this is like like in Minority Report where Tom Cruise, he's getting all the crimes in advance and he's up on the screen, he's moving all this stuff like that. That's sort of going to be the Falcons front office in terms of the 3-dimensional chess of if we go this way, then in the second round, what will be available to us? If we were picking a twosome group, group in there, would it be these two guys or these two guys? All that stuff gets baked into that and goes into the decision making for each pick, because as you know, it's like the butterfly effect. You go you go with the one guy here, it changes everything after that on the board for the NFL period, but then also on yours, and so those are all the discussions going on right now.
Yeah, it reminds me of last year when the Falcons took Drake London at 8, and it set off that huge receiver run immediately following that pick, and everyone was like, oh, that's kind of early for a receiver. And it's like, well, was it? Because as soon as they picked him, all the receivers went off the board, and it, really ended up hosing some teams that were later on. It forced the Saints to trade up for Olave. So, you can't just look at a pick in the vacuum necessarily. You have to look at how the rest of the board plays out. And that's one of the more fun things about it, is that especially when you're doing the mocks and building the boards, it's like, oh, how... If the first round starts this way, how does the second round go? Or if 4 quarterbacks go off, how does it go? That sort of thing. So It's very
A
entertaining.
1,000%.
Yeah.
And Kevin,
Yeah.
one thing I was going to add to that, it's not just
Yeah.
us that loves the mock draft. The NFL front offices, they actually look at all the different mock drafts that are being put out there because they start to run these scenarios like we're talking about. What percent chance is it that this guy gets to us in that pick? And then, if we went that direction in the second round, what are the odds that this guy are there? And so, yeah, to your point, it's well taken. That's exactly how it goes.
Yeah, yeah. All right, last thing we'll touch on real quick. Day 3 guys that you like for the Falcons. You mentioned Gerard Clark. I'm definitely a big fan of his. But yeah, any names out there that you think would just be good fits for the Falcons at any point, sort of in the later portions of the draft?
Well, I mentioned that, we talked about the receiver thing a little bit, and at least in my exercise, I went defense in the 2 rounds for the Falcons. So, just a couple guys I would toss out for after that, potential round 3, round 4 type guys that I would like. One of them, Michael Wilson, a guy that Kevin, you and I saw in Mobile, in what my months are getting away from me, January, right?
Technically, yeah.
Yeah, but Michael Wilson was a guy that always impressed when he was on the field at Stanford. It was just that it was a little bit on again, off again, because he would get injured and stuff like that. And he was also stranded in just this terrible offensive system. But there's a lot of different things to like about his game. He's just super duper well built. He comes in, he's almost 6'2", 216, had a 93rd percentile RAS, and there's one special sauce thing of his athletic profile that is not measured by the testing that we do. Fortunately, because of the radar and the tracking that, some of that data that we get to see the manifestation of this, which is his deceleration and acceleration. Michael Wilson was one of only 2 players at the Senior Bowl, regardless of position, that finished both in the top 15 in max speed that was tracked all week and top 5 in deceleration. And when you're watching Michael Wilson's tape, he is always opening up those throwing windows outside, when he leaves the route break. And the reason is because he throttles down just so fast. It is so unpredictable when he's going to just slam those brakes on, and no cornerback can stay with him on that. You constantly see like the cornerbacks, trying to put the brakes on with him, and then we'll start skidding. Like he just can't stop on a dime like Wilson can. And then Wilson can, just cut it out, or whatever, or do the comeback. So you get all that sort of stuff. He's got some wonkiness on the profile that's going to push him down just a little bit. Like I said, bad situation, was injury plagued these last couple of years. And then the only part I don't like about his athletic profile is his arms just happen to be a little bit shorter than you would think for how big his frame is. But those are the reasons why he's going to be available in, say, round 3. Who knows? Maybe even into round 4. That would be a guy that I would look at. Tank Dell would be another guy that I would look at, a guy that's just impossible to stay with in space in one-on-one coverage. Now, Tank Dell, he's a little pint-sized guy, but I've seen people toss out a comparison to like Tutu Atwell. He's not Tutu Atwell. Tutu Atwell at Louisville, he only did 2 things. They either got the snap and then they'd throw it to Tutu Atwell right away, and it'd be like a funnel screen or whatever. They'd manufacture touches for him, or they would let him scream down the field and then throw the deep shot when they had one-on-one. But Tutu Atwell didn't really do anything outside of those 2 things. So he was really raw in all these other aspects, whereas Tank Dell destroyed defenses at all 4 sectors of the field when he was on campus. And not only that, because it's like, oh, he's coming up from the G5. Well, he played at one of the best G5 programs, and they played multiple Power 5 schools, multiple Power 5 bowl schools here over the last couple of years. And they also played that Cincinnati team that made the playoff, the only G5 team that ever made the playoff. Tank Dell sliced and diced every single one of them. Again, at all sectors of the field, short, behind the line of scrimmage, intermediate, deep, the whole gamut of it. You look at his PFF grades these past couple of years, it was like all 4 sectors, he was 90 or above, like an elite grade for them. So that, you're starting to think about like compliments for a Kyle Pitts and a Drake London, and having Tank Dell in the slot, I think would be another good one with that. One last one that I would toss out for the receiver room, if we're just looking at that sort of middle round thing, a sleeper that I really like is Puka Nacua from BYU, another kid that we saw down at the Senior Bowl. When Puka Nacua was on the field the past couple of years, BYU's offense played way up, and whenever Puka Nacua was injured, it played way down. Puka Nacua, we talk about guys that play with their hair on fire. That's Puka Nacua. Every single rep, he's going full bore, including when he's blocking. But the cool thing about Puka Nacua, my colleague Derek Brown calls him Discount Debo. In terms of his, I comp Puka Nacua to Miles Austin, but the Deebo Samuel thing, you have to bring it up because Puka Nacua is one of the few receivers in this class that you can move around and then do the running stuff with him. When BYU would do the end arounds to him or get him in the backfield, different stuff like that, hand the ball off to him, he was really dangerous. There was this game this past year where they played South Florida. Puka Nacua gets 2 end arounds, I think in the first quarter, runs them both for touchdowns, but BYU would get too greedy trying to force all these touches to Puka Nacua. They tried it a third time, and that's when USF was like, yeah, we know it's coming now. And so the whole defense just swarmed him. He gets injured on that play, and then we didn't see him for a couple weeks, whatever. So he has some of the injury stuff too, just the past couple of years, just coming off the field, but it's more nagging type stuff. So your medical staff is going to have to be, be comfortable with that. But assuming that it is, Puka Nacua is going to bring you a lot more diverse skills than I think he's given credit for in the draft media.
Yeah, no, lots of good ones there. Tank Dell at the Senior Bowl was just like every single route, just dusting people, and that was he was maybe the most fun player to watch all week. So yes. It's definitely not just deep shots. Like he just cooked everyone on every single route in one-on-one. So fun guy to watch. He would definitely be an interesting one. Thor, really appreciate it, guys. He is Thor Nystrom at ThorKU on the Twitters, at FantasyPros as their NFL Draft and college football analyst, also at Score North as a Vikings analyst. Thor, anything else you'd like to plug before we sign off?
Just check out our stuff on FantasyPros. We have a draft guide out that's totally free. Have all the mock drafts, player rankings, scouting reports, all that sort of stuff. So that's what we're doing. Like Kevin mentioned, I put out the 2-round mock today, and I'll have my deep dive into the tight end class coming later this week.
Absolutely. Well, looking forward to reading it, Thor. Thanks again for coming on, guys. Thank you for watching. I'm Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin. Please like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening to the pod, leave us that 5-star review. Really appreciate that. Those things help us continue to grow. Again, thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. We'll be back next week with some more great content, some more terrific draft stuff as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft every day now. So again, guys, thank you so much for myself and for Thor. Have a great day, folks.